a song for you.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin. You may know me from this show and other stuff I've done. Today we're going to talk about the second movement, but only the first part. For some reason, it's broken into two separate pieces. So today we're just going to talk about the first part. And interestingly, it's much shorter than our episode yesterday. This part is only 6 minutes and 33 seconds. I imagine 3 seconds at least of that is probably silent. So really just 6.5 minutes. But this is titled as Adante, which is not the guy from Clerks. We're talking about tempo, and that would be 72 to 108 beats per minute. That's quite a range. That's a very wide range, going from slower to coming up to a moderate tempo. I'm seeing a couple of different variances in what that's actually categorized as, but that's about the average that I'm finding. So I'm willing to go with that. It's kind of reasonable. So I don't recall anything about this part at all. So I'm going to be very curious to kind of re-experience it for the first time, really. Like I said in yesterday's episode, I've heard the Concerto before. For some reason, I've never really connected with it, which is very strange. With the exception of the third movement, it's very strange because I love classical music. I love John Lord as a composer. So it's really weird that I haven't gotten into this more before. I've had a copy of it for, most of my life. I'm trying to remember if I had a copy of it on vinyl back in the old days. And I want to say I did, but it might have been on Harvest or Warner Brothers. And then now I have a copy on Tetragrammaton, which is nice. But I don't know. I don't know why I never connected with it. I was trying to think about that after I recorded yesterday's episode and really have just no damn excuse whatsoever. So anyway, we're going to get into the music right now. Here is the first segment of Movement 2 of Concerto for Group and Orchestra. This is a little bit creepy, and I almost wonder if this wasn't maybe inspired by music from the Twilight Zone. It feels very much like a background that you would hear during one of those episodes. I love that show. It's awesome. I would like if that was inspired by that. That would be really interesting. But yeah, it really has that feel to it. So I don't know. And obviously they let enough time go from the crowd's applause, or they just cut it out the way they edited it. But they must have let enough time go before starting the next movement until everybody in the crowd was quiet again. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise that could be coming from the audience, or it could be coming from people in the orchestra just getting set up. I don't know. But it's, it's just kind of a somber and dark piece so far, which is, it's kind of the way that the first movement started out a little bit, but that got out of it a lot more quickly than this. We're a minute in already, and we're still in, I feel like I'm heading toward a funeral. Yeah, I don't know if you guys are picking up on that. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. I heard like a chair creak. I'm hearing glasses. I'm hearing a little bit of voicing in the background. And remember, this is recorded live. This isn't a studio recording. This isn't anything that they had. I would imagine did not have like tons of microphones and a multi-track setup to really be able to give a clean recording. This it's a live performance, so you're going to expect to have some kinds of noises in there. Would have been nice to have had a nice studio recording of this, but not a huge deal. I imagine Tetragrammaton was like, look, we're going to pay for one or the other, and I don't see a reason to not do this as a live show. Makes perfect sense to do it that way, but I think that we're hearing a lot of things that aren't necessarily intended to be part of the song. I think this is one part that really does kind of hurt that we don't have some kind of descriptive title, whether it be a song name or just something that kind of gives us an understanding of what the story is here. If there's even a story, he could have just really been thinking in terms of music and not any other aesthetic. He could have thought about this as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. I don't know. I've never researched it and kind of don't want to. But it would be, I mean, I'm certainly curious to know what he had in mind here, because now we're 2.5 minutes into this 6 minute segment, and we're still, I mean, we've had a couple of lighter notes in here, but for the most part, we're still in some darkness. And it's really interesting. It's a contrast to the way the last movement ended, which is fine. That's not abnormal in classical music. But, because each movement typically it could be vastly different. And then the third, if it's a concerto, or the fourth, if it's a symphony, typically tie in themes from earlier parts and, become the culmination of everything that we've heard up to that point. But I don't really know what he's going for here. This is a very long passage of just dark and sad and tension, with the fast bowing strings, which he seems to really like for this piece because he's done that quite a bit. I don't know. It's interesting. I enjoy it. I like listening to this kind of stuff, but it has to, there has to be a reason for it. And I'm not understanding what the reason for it is here. So I like that little pulse that we're getting, just that, very slow heartbeat, that very typical for classical music to have some kind of a pulse to move things along, and especially in more somber or slower passages, because you have no reference for time or where the structure is. So to have that for the musicians as well as the audience is very important. But I feel like we're heading into something else now. We're right about halfway through. We're at the 3 minute and 15 second mark on the file. And I feel like we're heading into maybe some different territory. We heard a little cymbal bell, and now I think we're getting a little bit of organ. So I'll be curious to see where it goes. But yeah, I mean, the first half, pretty dark. I would say through that whole thing would be a beautiful background for a Twilight Zone episode. The scoring, style really matches the mood, the, unsure feelings, the tension of it all could work really well. I'm going to laugh if I go back and to a Twilight Zone episode and find it's really similar to this, but it feels like it could certainly fit. So I'm trying to keep in mind that this is only the first half of, or the first segment of the second movement, and that there's another part that's much longer that we're actually going to be listening to on the next episode. But right now, I feel like, wow, this is a really long build to something, almost too long, where it's interesting enough to keep my attention. But honestly, if I were in attendance and unable to stop the song and comment on it or whatever, I feel like I might start getting to the point where I'm like, all right, we need to get this thing going, because this is just, this is too long to not be having any kind of major change. I mean, it's adapted, it's evolved, but this is a very long build for something. Well, how interesting is that? I had no idea there were vocals before the third movement. So that just goes to show how little I knew about the concerto, as I said when we started this journey yesterday. Wow, very cool. I really like what the violins, there could be some violas in there as well, but I'll just say the strings. I love what the strings are playing behind Ian singing. Nice to see Ian Pace coming in there. Very cool. And, the lyrics are about basically the fear of failure. What if I go out there and I can't do it? What if I go out there and they don't like it? And think about, they had been doing some shows, both finishing out Mark I's lineup and starting Mark II's lineup. Like, it was a really weird time in the band. But by the time they get to this, it's just Mark II now. And you get one shot at this. Like, if you have a bad performance, it's not being re-recorded, right? You get one. So the pressure's on, not to mention how many rehearsals could they have possibly had? You're doing it in front of an audience. I mean, the pressure, if you really think about it, would be absolutely insane for something like this. But being the true performers they are, they went out and did it and did a great job as far as that goes. But yeah, I've always loved the lyrics. I love the phrasing of the vocals. That's always been something that's why I've known the third movement better, is because I always just go to where the vocals are, because I really like that. For one, I mean, the honest feeling that you get from Ian singing it. but also the music around it. I really like what they do later, but I like this too. I like it with the strings and Ian Pace, the kind of stuff he's playing, because it's a little bit jazzy, which is nice. It's exciting and interesting to listen to, but you also want to be focused on the vocals and the vocal melody and all that too. It's a lot to take in at one time. We've been sitting here with a very linear concerto for the most part, where we can just, okay, here's what they're giving us and we can focus on that. Now it's switched to this, or it's changed instruments, or this or that. But it's been fairly linear, not a lot of different things happening at one time, until you get to the rock and roll part and like Richie's solo over what the band is playing. But this, now we're starting to get some real layers in here, and I like the sound of it. I like the full feel of the symphony and the band as well. It's really starting to take shape for me now. Okay, that was a great transition, coming out from the band playing into just the orchestra carrying on, and then doing a little bit of a variation and a twist on what they were playing earlier. Very well done, I have to say. Also, I really like the way that Roger's bass is cutting through on that. The vocal was a little quieter in that second passage, which was a bit strange, but the bass was, sounded really good. Maybe a little bit muddy in the mix. But the recording is what the recording is. Like I said, I don't know how much ability they had multi-track wise to really separate and balance and clean up specific sounds. But there's definitely a lot of low end pushing through, and that might have been done intentionally to capture more the orchestra. But Roger's bass is really big in the mix, and Ian's got a lot of reverb on his vocals too. Part of that could be the room. It's just capturing the natural room reverb as well. But I would imagine that the engineer probably had a little bit on the vocal channel as well. And that's all we get for this file. I'm really confused as to why they broke it up, to be honest. And I'm confused for two reasons. One, the first movement was 19 minutes and 11 seconds, right? The second movement, part one, is 6 minutes and 33 seconds. And the second half is 12 minutes and 27 seconds, which would give us a total of 19 minutes. So that would be just 11 seconds shy of what movement one was. So I don't know why they broke it up as far as that goes. If they did it for titling purposes, well, we had 3 different tempos in the title of movement one. And for this, we only have a tempo for part one of the second movement. For part two, it's just called part two. There's not even a tempo reference. So I really, and then the third movement is going to be 15 minutes and 31 seconds. So I honestly have no idea why this was broken up. I could see if it was done for vinyl purposes to make sure that everything fit because of the time limitations on both sides. But once it was made for CD or, any kind of digital distribution, which is what I had the CD, or maybe I got it on iTunes. I can't remember now. But either way, I got a digital version of it. I don't know why it would have been broken up the same way that the vinyl would have been. So I'm just going to grab my vinyl real quick and check, because now I'm curious. Okay, so I checked my vinyls. I have 3 copies of this on vinyl. One is the original Tetragrammaton pressing, one is the Warner Brothers green label, and one is a Warner Brothers white label pressing. And all three of them are exactly as I'm looking at the files as they're broken out on the digital version. I can understand, again, if they had to break it up to be able to fit everything on a single vinyl album, I get why it's broken up the way it is. Why it's done for digital that way, that I really don't know, because there was really no need to replicate that. It's very possible just for historical accuracy they did it that way. That's really the only reason I can think of. So we're going to get into the second movement, second movement part 2 on Thursday, and then Friday we'll wrap it up with part 3. Interestingly, though, the labeling really got smaller and smaller as it went on, because first movement, we have 3 tempos. Second movement, part 1, we have 1 tempo. Second movement, part 2 is literally just labeled second movement, part 2. And then the third movement is just 3. not even a tempo or anything to it. So very strange. I don't know why that would have been done that way either. That makes absolutely no sense to me, but it is the way it is. We get what we get. What's important is always the music. So we will see you guys back on this show on Thursday. If you're interested, tomorrow being Wednesday, I should have another episode of the Haskincast podcast out. As I'm recording this, I have no idea what will be scheduled for that, as that is a month away. I do know that I'm creeping up on my 500th episode. I shouldn't be there by the time this airs. I should still be a little ways away from it, but it is coming up and will be here before the summer. So I'm very excited about that. I have no idea what I'm doing for that yet either. But in any case, thank you guys for joining me for this episode. This concerto is really interesting. I'm really glad that I decided to cover it, because I'm getting a chance to learn it and giving myself an extra reason to listen to it. Whereas, the limited time I have to listen to music outside of podcasts, I typically just want to go to comfort songs, right? I really want to hear this, so I listen to that. I really want to hear that, so I listen to that. I don't do a lot of experimental listening, again, outside of podcasts. If it's for a podcast, yeah, I do a lot of that. But I'm really glad, because this gives me a reason to dig into it a little more and appreciate it. I think this movement's been very interesting, a real departure from where we left off on movement 1. Can't wait to see where the rest of it goes, because I'm very perplexed with the progression of this song. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it, or at least my breakdown of it. And we'll see you guys on Thursday. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening.